1953, Willys Aero. The 1950s was the decade when American cars stopped looking like cars and started looking like rockets. Tail fins, chrome, wraparound windshields. The whole country was falling in love with speed and style. And then there was the Willys Aero. Willys, the company famous for building the World War II Jeep, decided to enter the passenger car market in 1952 with a sloping aerodynamic design that was supposed to look modern. The problem was it looked modern for about 30 seconds because every other automaker immediately leapfrogged it. By the time the Aero hit dealerships, it already looked like something from the previous decade. The engine didn't help. 91 horsepower from an inline-six at a moment when American buyers were discovering the V8 and never looking back. On the expanding American highway system, 91 horsepower wasn't bold. Production ended in 1955. Making Jeeps. The Aero was quietly forgotten, which was perhaps the kindest thing that could happen to it. 1954. Hudson Jet. Hudson had a long and proud history in American automotive circles. The Jet was not part of that proud history. Nicknamed the dull beige box almost immediately, and not affectionately, the Jet was Hudson's attempt at a compact car in a market that wasn't yet sure it wanted compact cars. The styling was conservative to the point of invisibility. Nothing about it said, "Buy me." Nothing about it even said, "Look at me." The deeper problem was economics. The Jet cost nearly as much to build as Hudson's full-sized luxury sedans, which meant the price point made no sense for what you were getting. You were paying near luxury money for a small, underpowered, unremarkable car. Hudson merged with Nash to form American Motors Corporation, AMC, in 1954, and the Jet was one of the first casualties of the consolidation. It never had time to find an audience, not that it was looking very hard. 1950, Nash Airflyte. The Nash Airflyte had one genuinely innovative feature. Americans called it the bathtub car, and once you've seen it, you understand completely. The body was round, bulbous, and fully enclosed. The front wheels were covered by the body panels, giving the car a smooth, unbroken silhouette that looked less like an automobile and more like an appliance. An aerodynamic appliance, but still. Nash's engineers were actually ahead of their time on wind resistance. The enclosed body was genuinely more aerodynamic than most American cars of the era. And the interior offered a feature that got a lot of attention. The front seats folded flat into a full-size bed. Nash marketed this aggressively, and the jokes wrote themselves. But the enclosed front wheels created a massive turning radius. Parking this car in a city was a genuine ordeal. And no matter how functional the engineering was, Americans in the early 1950s wanted their cars to look exciting. The bathtub car looked like it was designed to be hosed down. Sales reflected the nickname. 1956, Studebaker Golden Hawk. On paper, the Golden Hawk looked like a winner. A 275 horsepower Packard 5.8 stuffed into one of the better-looking bodies Studebaker ever produced. Sleek, low, with genuine presence on the road. In practice, Studebaker undermined it at every turn. Facing serious financial pressure, Studebaker began cutting costs in ways that customers noticed immediately. Turn signals. By 1956, a feature that most buyers considered basic, were made an optional extra you had to pay for separately. This was the automotive equivalent of charging extra for seatbelts, and it did not go over well. The price was also a problem. The Golden Hawk cost significantly more than comparable offerings from GM and Ford, and Studebaker simply didn't have the brand prestige to justify the premium. In a market dominated by the Big Three with their massive production advantages, Studebaker was fighting a losing price war. The Golden Hawk was a genuinely capable car that deserved better management. It didn't get it. 1950. Crosley Hot Shot. The Crosley Hot Shot wanted very badly to be a sports car. It was not, by any honest measure, a sports car. Powering this little open-top two-seater was an engine with a displacement of 44 cubic inches, an engine so small that most modern riding lawnmowers would look at it with condescension. Output was 26.5 horsepower. Top speed was technically around 70 miles per hour, though reaching it required patience, optimism, and a long downhill stretch. The engineering problems went beyond the power deficit. Parts fit together poorly from the factory. Transmissions leaked. Engines developed vibrations that worsened over time until components literally shook apart. Ownership was an ongoing mechanical negotiation. Crosley was a small company trying to build cheap cars for a post-war market that turned out to want the opposite of cheap. The Hot Shot was an interesting idea executed on a shoestring budget, and the shoestring showed. By 1952, Crosley was out of the car business entirely. 1957, Rambler Rebel. The 1957 Rambler Rebel has a legitimate claim to being the first American muscle car. With 255 horsepower, dropped into a mid-size body years before the Pontiac GTO made the concept famous. The problem was it looked absolutely nothing like a muscle car. From the outside, the Rebel was indistinguishable from a perfectly ordinary Rambler family sedan. The same conservative body, the same unassuming profile, the same vibe of reliable transportation for a responsible adult. The performance was there, the visual promise was not. And in 1957, the muscle car audience, which was just starting to form, only 1,500 Rebels were produced. The concept was ahead of its time, the execution was behind it, and the car disappeared without making the cultural impact its engineering deserved. MC would spend the next decade trying to figure out how to sell performance to an audience that wanted it to look like performance. The Rebel was an early lesson in that ongoing education. 1957, Ford Skyliner, retractable. The Ford Skyliner with its retractable hardtop is one of those cars where you watch the roof mechanism operate and think this is genuinely amazing. And then you remember that amazing complexity is the opposite of what you want in a daily driver. The retractable roof system contained over 600 moving parts. Motors, sensors, relays, linkages, an entire mechanical ecosystem dedicated to the single task of folding a steel roof into the trunk. When it worked, it was spectacular. A hardtop converting to a convertible at the push of a button in 1957. It was science fiction made real. Some frequency, the roof would stop wherever it happened to be, halfway up, halfway down, stuck at an angle. The repair costs were significant, and the parts were complex enough that most mechanics didn't want to touch it. The roof mechanism also consumed so much of the trunk that luggage space was almost non-existent. The added weight of all that machinery ruined what could have been decent handling. Having proved both that the concept was possible and that possible wasn't the same as practical. 1955, Dodge La Femme. Dodge looked at the American woman in 1955 and asked, "What does she want in a car?" And then Dodge answered its own question without apparently consulting any actual women. The La Femme, French for the woman, in case subtlety was a concern, came in heather rose pink and sapphire white, with a rose-patterned interior, a matching pink raincoat stored in the seat back, matching rain hat, and a matching pink purse that fit into a special compartment in the seat. The car was not a vehicle. It was a fashion accessory that happened to have an engine. What women actually wanted in 1955, as market research, had anyone conducted it honestly, would have revealed, was reliability, reasonable price, and to be treated like competent adults making a significant purchasing decision. The La Femme offered none of these things. Only 2,500 units sold over 2 model years before Dodge quietly discontinued the concept. The La Femme endures today as a museum piece and a case study in what happens when marketing assumptions replace actual consumer understanding. 1950, Nash Rambler. The Nash Rambler was designed to be light, economical, and practical, a sensible small car for a post-war market, and it succeeded at being light, perhaps more than was advisable. Owners consistently reported that the Rambler shook noticeably at highway speed, not a gentle vibration, but an active shimmy that could become alarming in crosswinds or during passing maneuvers. Above 50 miles per hour, the car's light weight and narrow track combined to produce handling characteristics that charitably could be called lively, and more honestly could be called unsettling. In an era when American highways were expanding and speeds were rising, a car that became difficult to control above 50 miles per hour was a genuine liability. The Rambler nameplate survived under AMC and eventually found its footing as a sensible economy car. But the earliest iterations taught Nash some hard lessons about the relationship between weight, stability, and driver confidence. 1958, Edsel Corsair. No list of automotive disasters is complete without the Edsel, and the Corsair was the highest profile variant of what became Ford's most famous failure. The grille is where everyone starts, a vertical oval in the center of the horizontal front end. Unlike anything else on American roads, Ford called it distinct. Critics called it a toilet seat. Customers called it ugly. The name stuck, and the car never recovered from first impressions. But the grille wasn't even the most problematic design decision. That honor goes to the Teletouch transmission, a system where the gear selector buttons were mounted in the center of the steering wheel hub, where the horn was, as in the same place drivers instinctively hit when they needed to honk. Edsel owners across America were accidentally shifting gears while trying to alert pedestrians, which is exactly as dangerous as it sounds. Ford spent $400 million developing the Edsel, roughly $4 billion in today's money. They sold fewer than 120,000 total across all model years before canceling the line in 1959. The Edsel became so synonymous with corporate failure that it remains a cultural shorthand for a product that should never have existed. 1957, King Midget Model 3. The King Midget was sold through mail order. You could, in 1957, flip through a catalog, fill out an order form, and have a car delivered to your home. This felt futuristic. Almost everything else about the King Midget felt the opposite. The engine produced 9.2 horsepower. The top speed was somewhere in the neighborhood of 55 miles per hour, which you would only attempt if you had made peace with your circumstances. The body was open, the frame was minimal, and the safety equipment consisted of whatever optimism you brought to the driver's seat. No seatbelts, no crumple zones, no meaningful protection of any kind. The King Midget found a small but loyal niche as a novelty, a cheap runabout for fair weather use on private property or very quiet roads. It was not, by any reasonable standard, a highway vehicle. Midget Motors Corporation sold them in small numbers through the early 1970s to buyers who understood exactly what they were getting. The ones who didn't understand were in for a very educational experience. 1950 Allstate by Sears. Tools, appliances, houses you could order in kit form and build yourself, so it made a certain Sears logic to also sell cars through the catalog. The Allstate was essentially a rebadged Henry J, a small economy car from Kaiser Frazer, dressed up with Sears branding and sold alongside washing machines and work boots. The price was reasonable. The specifications were modest. The deal breaker was the trunk. The Allstate had no external trunk lid. To access the cargo area, you folded the rear seat back forward and crawled through from the interior. This was the automotive equivalent of a refrigerator with no door on the front. Technically functional, practically maddening. Only 1,300 Allstates sold before Sears exited the automobile business and returned to selling things that didn't require you to climb through the back seat to retrieve your groceries. It remains one of the stranger retail experiments in American commercial history. 1957, Dodge Custom Royal, Torsion Air. The Dodge Custom Royal looked spectacular in 1957. Long, low-finned, exactly what the decade demanded of its automobiles. Dodge's marketing was proud, confident, and built heavily around the car's new Torsion Air suspension system, which promised a smoother, more controlled ride than conventional springs. What the marketing didn't mention was that the torsion bars had been rushed into production before the engineering was fully resolved. In real-world use, the bars proved prone to snapping or seizing, either failing suddenly and causing the car to sag dramatically to one side, or locking up in ways that affected steering and stability at exactly the moments you needed both. Dodge spent considerable effort on warranty repairs and quietly improved the system in subsequent model years. The Custom Royal itself was a handsome car that deserved better engineering discipline. The Torsion Air name survived. Dodge used torsion bar suspension for decades, but the 1957 launch remains a cautionary tale about the cost of rushing a new system to market. 1950 Davis Devon. The Davis Devon was the brainchild of Glenn Gordon Davis, a California car dealer with enormous ambition, and it turned out, an equally enormous capacity for fraud. The concept, a three-wheeled car, two wheels in front, one in back, with a wide, low body that Davis claimed could seat 4 people side by side. The aerodynamics were genuinely interesting. The stability was not. At speeds above roughly 20 miles per hour, the three-wheel configuration became increasingly unpredictable. A car designed for American highways that became dangerous at 20 miles per hour was, to put it gently, not fit for purpose. Davis raised substantial investment money, more than he was entitled to raise, as it turned out, and set up a factory in Van Nuys, California. He hired workers, took orders, and made promises. Only 13 cars were ever completed. Davis was eventually convicted of fraud, and the operation collapsed. The Devon joined the long list of American automotive dreams that ended in a courtroom. 1958, Renault Dauphine. The Renault Dauphine was imported from France and sold in America with considerable optimism. Americans, it was theorized, were ready for a small, economical European car. That theory was not wrong. The VW Beetle proved it conclusively. The Dauphine proved something different. 0 to 60 miles per hour in just over 30 seconds. That number is not a typo. 30 seconds. In the era of the V8, on the expanding American interstate system, the Dauphine required nearly half a minute to reach highway speed. Merging onto a freeway was an act of faith. The rust problem was almost more impressive. The Dauphine was so susceptible to corrosion that cars reportedly began showing rust before they reached American dealerships, developing oxidation during the transatlantic voyage from France. A new car, still on the delivery ship, already rusting. Consumer Reports named the Dauphine the worst car ever tested at that time. Renault soldiered on in the American market for years before eventually retreating. The Dauphine was not the reason Americans stayed loyal to Detroit in the late 1950s, but it didn't help make the case for imports. 1959. Buick LeSabre. The 1959 Buick LeSabre was not a subtle car. More chrome, more fins, more everything, and the LeSabre arrived as something close to the logical endpoint of that escalation. The chrome alone weighed 200 pounds. Not the whole car, just the decorative chrome trim applied to the exterior. 200 pounds of metal doing nothing functional, existing purely to gleam in showroom lighting and catch the eye of buyers who equated brightness with quality. An automatic with a torque converter so smooth it transmitted almost no road feel to the driver. The LeSabre became notorious for what journalists described as driving like a battleship through molasses. Enormous, quiet, disconnected, and in no particular hurry. For buyers who wanted exactly that, it was perfect. For anyone interested in something resembling driving engagement, it was a deeply discouraging experience. 1953. Kaiser Dragon. The Kaiser Dragon distinguished itself through interior ambition that exceeded interior judgment. Kaiser dressed the cabin in bamboo-patterned vinyl, an exotic, textured material intended to suggest luxury and originality. It suggested them briefly until the roof material revealed its fatal flaw. It absorbed water, rain, humidity, morning dew. The padded vinyl roof material soaked it all up and held it. The result, over time, was a car that smelled like a damp basement. Mildew set in. The distinctive Dragon interior that was supposed to justify the premium price became a source of ongoing unpleasantness that no amount of airing out could fully resolve. And the Dragon's material problems did nothing to reassure buyers that the company had its quality control sorted out. Kaiser exited the American automobile market in 1955. 1957. Mercury Turnpike Cruiser. A long, low, heavily chromed machine with retractable roof panels and a retractable rear window that was supposed to create a breezy, open feeling at highway speed. In practice, the retractable rear window created a wind tunnel. Open it at speed, and the interior became loud, turbulent, and uncomfortable in ways the designers apparently did not test adequately before production. The roof-mounted air intakes, a dramatic styling element on the exterior, leaked in rain, not occasionally, reliably. The Turnpike Cruiser was a car specifically named for highway, used that let rain in through the roof at highway speed. The engineering ambition consistently outran the engineering execution, which was becoming a pattern in late 1950s American cars that tried to do too many clever things at once. 1950 Ford Crestliner. Chevrolet was offering two-tone paint options, and Ford wasn't. Rather than retool their body stampings to accommodate a proper two-tone design, which would have taken time and money, Ford's answer was the Crestliner. The solution was straightforward. Take a standard Ford sedan and glue a vinyl roof panel onto it to create the visual impression of a two-tone car. Different color on top, different color on the body, problem solved. Sort of. The vinyl didn't age well. It peeled, it cracked. It trapped moisture against the metal underneath, accelerating rust, and discerning buyers could see immediately that the premium appearance was cosmetic rather than structural. A thin layer of material applied to what was underneath a standard Ford with standard Ford pricing. The Crestliner sold in modest numbers for 2 years before Ford found proper two-tone solutions and retired the concept. 1951. Mercury Monterey. The Mercury Monterey looked the part. Distinctive vinyl roof, careful two-tone color combinations, a level of visual polish that made it stand out on the showroom floor. Mercury positioned it as a prestige offering, a step above the standard line, and then you drove it 0 to 60 miles per hour in 18.2 seconds. For a car being sold on the strength of its appearance and implied status, the Monterey moved with the urgency of a car that had nowhere to be and no particular interest in getting there. Simply couldn't deliver the performance that the styling suggested. In an era when American buyers were beginning to understand that a car could be both beautiful and fast, the Monterey offered beauty and slowness. It sold because the styling was genuinely attractive, but it left a gap between expectation and experience that became harder to justify as the decade progressed and the competition got faster. 1959, Chevrolet El Camino. Half car, half truck, the body of a passenger car mated to a cargo bed is actually a durable one. Ford's Ranchero pioneered it in 1957, and the El Camino nameplate would survive into the 1980s. But the 1959 original is worth examining as a first-generation stumble. The problem was commitment. The El Camino of 1959 wasn't fully a car or fully a truck. It split the difference and satisfied neither audience completely. The cargo bed was too small for serious hauling. Contractors and farmers looked at it and went back to buying actual trucks. The interior was too cramped for comfortable family use. The ride, tuned for load carrying, was stiff for a vehicle most people would use as a daily driver. Chevrolet actually discontinued the El Camino after the 1960 model year, only bringing it back in 1964 on a different platform that addressed many of the original's shortcomings. The concept was sound. The execution needed another attempt before it found its footing. 1957 Lincoln Premier. To put that in perspective, a standard parking space today is 18 feet. The Premier was longer than the space it was supposed to fit into. For Lincoln's target buyer, wealthy, chauffeured, unconcerned with parking, this was less of a problem. For the broader market of successful Americans who were driving themselves and navigating real streets and real driveways, the Premier's dimensions created daily logistical challenges. Visibility from the driver's seat was poor. The turning circle was enormous. Driveways designed for normal cars of the era couldn't accommodate it without a multi-point turn. The Premier sold respectably because Lincoln had prestige. And the mid-1950s were prosperous times, but it represented the outer limit of how large American cars could get before size became a liability rather than an asset, a limit the industry would keep pushing anyway for a few more years before the 1973 oil crisis enforced a reckoning. 1958. Buick Limited. The 1958 Buick Limited was a car for buyers who had concluded that restraint was for people who couldn't afford otherwise. Chrome covered nearly every available surface. The wheelbase stretched to 127.5 inches. Weight topped out at over 4,600 pounds. Fuel economy hovered around 8 miles per gallon. In an era of cheap gas, still an impressive commitment to inefficiency. Contemporary automotive journalists describe bringing the Limited to a stop as dragging an anchor. The brakes, conventional drums, were not engineered for the task of slowing nearly 5,000 pounds of chrome and steel from highway speed with any authority. The Limited was a car designed to impress at 30 miles per hour and hope nothing unexpected happened at 70. It was also produced in this specification for only one model year. Buick reconsidered its approach in 1959. The Limited name returned later in the decade in a substantially different form, but the 1958 original remains a monument to the specific excess that defined the tail end of the chrome era. 1955. Cadillac Eldorado Biarritz. Adjusted for inflation, somewhere in the neighborhood of $70,000 in today's money. For that investment, buyers received a genuinely beautiful convertible, one of the most handsome designs Cadillac ever produced, dripping with the confidence that only the top of the market can project. They also received standard drum brakes underneath 4,900 pounds of automobile. Drum brakes in 1955 were not unusual. Disc brakes weren't yet common on American production cars, but drum brakes on a car this heavy, driven by buyers who expected to use the performance that Cadillac implied, created a meaningful stopping distance problem. The engineering of the braking system did not keep pace with the engineering of everything else. At $70,000 equivalent, buyers were entitled to expect that the car could stop as impressively as it looked. The Biarritz was beautiful in ways that are hard to argue with. The braking system was an afterthought in ways that are equally hard to defend. 1959. Cadillac Eldorado Brougham. If the Biarritz was expensive, the 1959 Eldorado Brougham was in a different category entirely. At $13,075 in 1959, more than the average American house at the time, the Brougham was less a car than a statement about what money could buy at the absolute ceiling of American consumer culture. The standard equipment list reflected this: stainless steel cocktail cups stored in the center console, a perfume atomizer, a small device for spraying fragrance into the cabin, lipstick holder, cigarette case, vanity mirror. The Brougham was equipped for a cocktail party that happened to be in motion. The air suspension system, designed to provide an impossibly smooth, level ride regardless of road conditions, collapsed with such regularity that Cadillac eventually offered to replace it with conventional springs at no charge rather than continue repairing it. The most expensive car in America came with an apology built into the ownership experience. The Brougham is remarkable for its excess and fascinating for its failure. There has never been anything quite like it before or since. 1956. DeSoto Adventurer. Chrysler wanted the DeSoto Adventurer to be the brand's answer to the Corvette, a performance car that could reach the buyers who wanted thrills rather than transportation. The engine cooperated. A high-output Hemi 5.8 with 320 horsepower gave the Adventurer genuine straight-line capability. On paper, the performance numbers were there. The chassis did not cooperate. Underneath the sporty exterior, the Adventurer used the same soft, floaty suspension calibrated for the full-size DeSoto family sedan. The springs and dampers were tuned for boulevard comfort, not cornering. Put all that horsepower into a corner, and the Adventurer communicated clearly that it would prefer you didn't do that. The buyers who wanted a Corvette bought a Corvette. The buyers who wanted a DeSoto bought a regular DeSoto. The Adventurer fell between both audiences, offering the power without the handling that would have made it credible as a sports car. DeSoto itself didn't survive the decade. Chrysler shut the brand down in 1960. 1958, Lincoln Continental Mark III. The Continental Mark III was the fullest expression of that commitment and also a demonstration of where it led. Nearly 20 feet long, the most expensive Lincoln ever produced to that point, a genuinely imposing car that projected status from every angle and every chrome-trimmed surface. The durability, unfortunately, did not match the price. The Mark III was known for build quality issues that sat awkwardly alongside its premium positioning, body panels that didn't align precisely, electrical systems that required attention, fit and finish problems on a car where buyers expected perfection. A car can survive being expensive, or it can survive being unreliable. Doing both simultaneously in the luxury market is nearly impossible. The Continental nameplate survived. Lincoln would eventually produce some of the most respected American luxury cars under it. But the 1958 Mark III is remembered as a stumble at the top of the market. 1958. Chevrolet Yeoman. We end where the decade began, not with excess and chrome and fins, but with the opposite. The 1958 Chevrolet Yeoman was a station wagon intended for young families who needed practicality above all else and couldn't afford extras. Chevrolet delivered on the no extras promise completely. No radio, no air conditioning, no two-tone paint, no chrome beyond the minimum. The Yeoman came in colors that reviewers of the era described in terms that rhyme with boring. The overall impression was of a vehicle that had been designed by someone who considered the car's primary virtue to be its not costing very much. The problem was that the American car market of 1958, even at the economy end, was responding to aspiration. Buyers wanted to feel that their car reflected something positive about them, even if they were spending carefully. The Yeoman reflected nothing except frugality, and frugality, as a sole selling point, proved insufficient. It lasted 2 model years before Chevrolet repositioned the wagon lineup. The Yeoman is remembered, when it is remembered at all, as proof that there is a floor below which even economical buyers will not go, a floor defined less by price than by dignity.